Hello, everybody. My name is Keith Berry, and I'm happy to introduce our moderator for this session, Dr. Tasha Dunn, who just be reading a little bit from her bio, uses a hands-on approach to teaching and research in her work that's inspired by work in the media industry, which drives the bulk of her research, which addresses the interwoven relationship between media and life, particularly looking at interpersonal relationships, which I think is particularly relevant here today, social media, critical cultural studies, and so on and so forth. She's published in a bunch of places. Most notably is probably her award-winning book, Talking White Trash, Mediated Representations and Lived Experiences of White Working Class People, which was published through Routledge in 2019. So I'm thrilled to not only introduce Tasha, but that this great session is here in response to this great book. So Tasha, the virtual floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. So I'm honored to moderate this Meet the Authors live session for a couple of reasons today. First, Lisa and Dave are dear friends of mine. I've known both of them for, I was thinking about this, well over a decade now. We all got our PhDs at the University of South Florida together. And so we've been in the trenches together. But more importantly, why I'm excited is when I knew this book was coming out, I was so excited that I pre-ordered it and then read it immediately upon arrival. And I can say with certainty that the book is equally engaging, heart-wrenching, evocative, and relatable. I think there's a lot to be said about this work. I'm excited about the discussion that we're going to have. And as we get started, I would like you, Dave and Lisa, to introduce yourselves and just give us a brief overview of the project. So for those who may not have read the book, if you could tell us a little bit about the key themes, the intended audience or audiences, and the overall aims for the book.
Go ahead, Lisa. You can start.
Okay. I was like, do you want me to go first? Okay. So if you've read the book, you know, Dave and I have been talking about our family estrangement for, gosh, Tasha said we've known each other for over 10 years. Dave and I have probably been talking about our estrangement with our families for maybe 5 to 8 years of those 10 years. And we talked about doing a paper together. And then finally we were just like, maybe there are other people out there struggling with this, wanting to write through it, talk about it, be in conversation with others experiencing it. Why don't we put a call out and see if there are people interested, and maybe we can write a book. We pitched it to Routledge and they were thrilled. So it ended up being kind of taking our pain that we were experiencing and turning it into a labor of love with others. And you know, some of the themes we could have organized them in several ways, but we organized them in ways that wherever the stories led us to understand maybe the root of, or the pain caused by, or the, you know, kind of like that is what we decided to go with, the root of the estrangement. Dave, you want to add on to that? I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Dr. Lisa Spinazola, and I graduated with my PhD in communication from USF here in Florida. And I worked there as a visiting instructor for 3.5 years and finally landed my permanent position with Western Governors University. And I'm an instructor there and I'm loving my job. So that's me and a little bit about the project. And now to you, Dave.
All right. Well, I can't remember all the questions now, but anyway, as far as the book goes, it's been something that's been, like Lisa said, really heavy on our minds and hearts for a long time. And we have very similar stories, she and I, her with her mother and me with my father. So that's where our connection really grew from just sharing those frustrations. But when we started the idea of the book, you know, we just realized that this is a topic that a lot of people just don't talk a lot about. And if you've read some of the chapters from this book, you see how so it's just really difficult. The trauma and shame of estrangement. And then I think you asked about where we're at. So I'm at Western Washington University, and I teach classes on intercultural, interpersonal, and one of my favorite classes I teach there is a class on communicating identity and difference, which some of these topics from this book come up in that class because we use autoethnography in that. And then as we go through those classes and just conversations in general, I just realized how important this topic is to still have and keep going. So that's me.
Great. Thank you. Thank you both. And I have a couple of questions as we kick off the kind of question and answer portion of this that I wanted to start with. Could you both first, could you speak to the writing process of the book? So how did the collection come together? And I know you can all see in the program that the book is divided into 4 parts. And I'm just curious about kind of how the process came together. And specifically, you mentioned in the book that you were both compassionate witnesses to other people's stories of trauma, but that you were also writing these stories yourself. So I'm curious what the process was like for you.
So what was really interesting, when we put the call out, we just got like 14 parts of story, like the beginnings of people telling their stories. Actually, that's not true. We did have 1 or 2 that were beautifully already fully fleshed out, and it was amazing to get that. It was that's where we saw this hope. Like there were we had these parts of narratives, you know, chaos narratives, and then a couple that had already like worked through it. And so it was great to see that, because it there was a built-in hope, I feel like, to how these things could unfold. For me personally, sitting down with other people's stories, and I'll talk about the themes really quickly, just so you have an idea. The 4 themes were estrangement due to lingering like childhood neglect, abuse, or abandonment; estrangement because of family secrets and betrayals; estrangement because of a search for identity, belonging, and home; or estrangement that's out of our hands. So sitting there in this pain, like this pain that's on the pages, trying to say to the other authors, hey, I'm so sorry, this is so terrible. However, this doesn't work. Like, how do we get the story out of what it is? Like, you are literally screaming on your pages, and I feel it. And so trying to find that way to speak to people, to say your story's valid, your story's important, but your story's not there yet. It's not on the page yet. How do we get it onto the page? Because I'm good at reading between the lines, and I could see what was happening between the lines, but it needed to be on the lines. It could not be up for debate or discussion what was trying to be said. So that was interesting for me in what I was doing. Was trying to help authors find their stories. You know, is this what you're saying, or is this what you're saying? Like, what are you saying here? What matters to this story?
Thank you, Lisa. Dave, what about for you? What was the process like? Maybe internet is questionable. Okay. When Dave chimes back in, if he can hear, he can answer the next part of the second question I have, which is kind of the one I think I'm most interested in. So one of the points that you make in the book is that you want to rupture the myth that estrangement brings closure. And I think those of us who have dealt with estrangement, which I would argue is pretty much everyone, can agree with that. Rarely, if ever, brings closure. So I'm curious, I think you do.
Let's try this again.
Oh, he's
Okay.
here. Okay, good. I'm talking about the aftermath part of it. So, you talk about the myth about. You talk about how there's a myth in that you want to rupture the myth that estrangement brings closure in the book. And I think you do a nice job explaining and demonstrating that. But I'm curious, since the publishing of the book, what kind of aftermath have you encountered, given that there is no closure to estrangement?
Okay, I think you asked about the aftermath.
Yeah.
Okay. For me, I don't know, it's really hard to put into words. This is something I've carried with me for a really long time. But one thing that has happened is it made me realize that, while estrangement has always had this kind of taboo about it, you can't force a relationship. And so I've had to be okay with walking away from a relationship that has never really been. But I think I was, in the past, and I've written several articles about my father, I think in the past I was always trying to force the relationship into a narrative. And now I have been able to just walk away from that. And reading all the other contributions that were in this book has also given me a lot of, I think, just personal awareness that it's okay to walk away from familial relationships.
Apt. What about you, Lisa?
So for me, I think about in the aftermath for me was really interesting in terms of, by the time I was writing my story, my mother and I were no longer estranged. So I was writing from a place of more remembering what led to the estrangement, how the estrangement was, and reconciling like how much I was going to let her back in, right? So for my personal story. And then now that we're reconciled, I have to show her the piece, because now it's, now it's going to be out in the world, and we're reconciled. So I can't just all of a sudden like have this piece out there floating around that she has no knowledge of. So I shared the piece with her, and everything about her that I've been battling my entire life played out in a 3-month period. Her narcissism, her underhandedness, it just all came out because it started with, this is beautiful, you need to say what you need to say. Yes, let's, because I offered, maybe you can write something, you can write a response to what I've written. What are your memories? What is your experience of this time between us? And all of her niceness was in an effort to get me to not publish. When my email, my intro to her was, this is coming out in May. I need you to be aware of it. You can write a response to it and put it out into the world. And she spent 2 or 3 months trying, without me knowing, she was being all kind and everything. And then at the 3-month mark, she said, I just realized this is coming out no matter what. I don't ever want to speak to you again. We're over. And so, and she, who ran to Mexico and is an expat in Mexico, found an estrangement group to join in Mexico, which made me laugh really hard about a bunch of people who've left their families are now whining to each other about being estranged from their families. And it's run by a lawyer and a psychiatrist, and the lawyer wanted her to sue me to stop the publication of the book. So anyway, the aftermath has been interesting. But the idea of closure, I want to speak to that. We just had holidays, and my sister came up to me and hugged me and said she woke up crying hysterically because she had a dream. Like they still interact with our mother, who said she has no plans ever to interact with me again, which I'm okay with because I've already processed it all. But my sister is so torn by the fact that we will never be in a common space again, that she has nightmares and horrible dreams about it and cries about it still after all of these years, because in her head, she still wants some kind of a peaceful, wholesome family outcome, which is not going to happen. So the idea of closure is just, it's an interesting thing. It's like a death where the person is still there doing their thing with other people you interact with, but they're just not part of you anymore. But they are, right? They're not part of you. They are part of you. They're part of everything. So that is my response to that question.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. That's aftermath for sure. So I asked my main questions, and I'm sure there are several other burning ones here. This topic is so relevant. So feel free to ask Dave and Lisa any questions. And if you wouldn't mind, if you could also type the question in the chat. I know there's some hearing issues happening. So if you wouldn't mind doing that as well, I'm happy to do it too. So yeah, feel free. Who would like to ask Dave and Lisa, our authors, a question?
I'll go with the question.
Yeah.
So again, so thrilled to be part of this conversation. Happy for you and happy these stories are out in the world. I haven't seen the book yet, but I've been treated interpersonally to your stories in different ways, right, over the years. So my question is, I'm thinking this conversation and this work has me thinking about the taboo of estrangement, and that estrangement works as like a normative conceptualization in a negative way, and that that blood is thicker than water, or what is it? The whole, it's family, right? These ties can't bind. Like, have you in your stories encountered, what has that cultural narrative been like, if it affected you at all? This idea that one shouldn't be estranged, one should work. I disagree with that, by the way, but it's there, right? And I don't know if that's played out in either year two, and the media doesn't help with this, of course. But I don't know if this is played out in either your two stories or as you edited the contributors' stories and you saw their work. What do you think, Lisa? I think David might be frozen. Yeah, but did that make sense?
Oh yeah. Well, it's a factor, right? You only have one mother.
Mm-hmm.
You only have one father, and this idea that you have to make it work at all costs. But sometimes the cost is your soul. Like it's the cost is high. And I still grapple with guilt, right? Even though I am settled, like I am settled, I am grateful, I have a peace about me, but there's still a little teensy piece of guilt because I worry that I'm hurting the other people in my family by, I have one sister who feels caught in the middle, and I have another sister who just wishes everybody could get along. So my guilt is about them. It's not about my relationship with my mother. And what I saw play out in the stories is the same, a lot of, I can't do this. I can't do this because, this is family. This is family, right? And so it's just really interesting. Dave, are you back? Are you there? Okay.
So I still get told by my mother that I have to work this out. That I have to have a relationship with my dad, even though they're divorced and she has no relationship with him. That's okay to end that relationship, but it's not me to end mine. I think that's an interesting twist on how compared to their children in relationship to their parents. And it's just, and Lisa was talking about the guilt, and I think you know, I don't know if you can ever get rid of the guilt. I carry it with me all the time, but I'm also don't feel as torn as I have in the past because this relationship needed to end. It was very toxic. It wasn't healthy for me to try to keep trying to, and I have tried a lot. And I've written, like I said, several articles about this, and I was just on this cycle of, I would keep ending up in the same place where, okay, this isn't going to work, I need to end this relationship. But then I would try again and like, okay, this isn't going to work, I need to end this relationship. So it was really trying, but my mom needs to get off my back. And I finally told her that. I'm like, this isn't about you, it's about me. And I don't want a relationship with this person because he's never been a father to me. So she's finally kind of backed off a little bit. But now I'm seeing it with my nephew and my brother. My brother seems to be repeating a lot of the things that my dad did to us. And my nephew's talked to me a lot about not wanting to see my brother anymore, his dad. And, so I don't know if my expression of dissatisfaction with my relationship with my dad has affected my nephew. Maybe he would give more chances to my brother if he didn't know my story. So there's something else that I carry with me.
Mm-hmm. Reminds me of that book from R.D. Laing in the 70s, I think, Knots, Knots.
Yes.
The knottiness of interpersonal relationships. I got that from Bachner. That the word forever intertwined. Lisa's sisters, who she loves dearly. Your mom, this other person. It reminds me of how complicated it is. And just to close, but was just to amplify the support. I personally believe that cultural narrative is sometimes unbreakably strong, right? And that to me makes the existence of your book even more bold and important and meaningful. So cheers to that, friends.
Yeah.
Can't wait to read it.
Echo that. It looks like Nelson has a question. Nelson.
Yes, thank you. Congratulations on your book again. Haven't had a chance myself to look at it, but it seems very interesting. My question is, if you could talk a little bit about the organizational in terms of like how you were able to include your stories along with the other stories. And that's part two of the question. Were there any powerful, let's say, sections that you found change your perspective?
Okay, I would like to start with that. So I think the first one part of that was about the connections. And to me, that's the power of autoethnography, that even though our stories are not exactly the same generationally, there might be differences, age, where we live culturally, but we can always make those connections through autoethnography to each other's stories, because there's always something that we can relate to and build upon. Then as far as things making an impact, having read all these and really, many times over as an editor, there was one passage I would like to share now because I think it really speaks to that. And this is from Fiona Murray's chapter, My Mom is a Dreamer. And she's getting a tattoo at a tattoo shop, and she talks about the initial pain of the tattoo. And the tattoo artist doesn't say anything, but he points to a message that's on the wall. And it says, the tattoo represents not only a willingness to accept pain, to endure it, but a need to actively embrace it, because life is painful, beautiful, but painful. And it goes on, I breathe into the pain and understand the statement wholly. Our stories are our labors. The moment becomes immersive and experiential. As I relax into it, the physical manifestation of the pain brings me back to me, grounds me, and makes me present in the moment. He has several letters to write before the pain stops. He will write the word refuse, the French word for dreamer. My son wrote "My Mama est une refuse" in French class, the title of his Mother's Day poem. It said, "It's because I'm often somewhere else in my mind that he often has to repeat himself." I feel guilty about my lack of presence. I get the word tattooed on my arm as a reminder that I'll be present, and as I promise to myself that my relationship with my children will be as permanent as the ink that sinks into my layers of skin. I think of my own mom and wonder where she might be this Mother's Day. Will my sister be looking after her? Will she think of me? I wonder briefly if I might hear from her, but I know the answer. Family estrangement, by its very nature, is a chronic condition. It lives in silence. It is otherworldly, dwelling in the world of the haunted and the world of the dreamer. Living with family estrangement is not through your own choice, requires a passive waiting that marks you permanently. The learning is the endurance of pain and the killing of hope. Waiting becomes, like the tattoo, a permanent state. And I think this last paragraph really speaks to that idea of the, like the word she uses, the haunting of estrangement, especially when you're not the one who initiated the estrangement. So whether you're the initiator or or not, estrangement is something that, like she called it, a chronic condition, and I think that's just very true. That paragraph specifically has really spoke to me throughout this whole process, and really sits with me all the time. Every time I think about the book or my relationship with my dad, that paragraph comes to mind.
I want to share that one of the narratives was, so my narrative is about being a daughter who was abandoned by her mother. Another narrative is a woman grappling with no relationship with her children because she left her children. And so I had to be very careful while I was reading and editing her story, that I wasn't putting my own crap into it, that I was not blaming her, that I was not holding her accountable for my pain, that I was reading and I tried to read it for maybe the mother who ran perspective, right? So that's what I'll say. I had always had a sympathy for my mother who left us with our violent and abusive father because she escaped. She had to escape that. I always had sympathy for her in that. But when I had my own children, I realized there is nothing that would make me leave behind my children. And that's when it became hard to forgive my mother for what she did. And so then I'm reading another mother's story who had to leave for her own safety. And how do I gave that same sympathy and understanding to this author because that is her story, right? And she's grappling with the aftermath of that herself. So that part was interesting for me because I got to read another character in my story, like from a different perspective.
Wow. Thank you for sharing. Darlene has a great question. Darlene, if you wouldn't mind sharing your question.
Okay. I was trying to sneak behind the scenes, but I teach the future teachers at USF. I don't think my camera's coming on. I just got a new computer and I don't know, something's dysfunctional. Anyway, my students are always asking me, because I teach them educational psychology, so they assume I'm a psychologist. They want to know, what can a teacher do to help a child who comes from a dysfunctional family? What should we do to support that child? And I also wondered if you had teachers in your lives who made a difference.
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. And a couple of the teachers who made a difference for me are teachers who saw me and validated me. It wasn't nothing too overt, just who saw me, because I felt very invisible in my home life. one of the main teachers that I remember is a teacher who read my writing. This was in like 10th grade, and told me I was a good writer, and read a story I was writing about my parents' divorce and the aftermath of the divorce. And he said, you know, keep at this because you're a good writer. And that validated the part of me, because I've always been a writer. I've loved writing, and it's been my escape. It's been my healing. It's been everything I've needed. And so having a teacher say that to me made all the difference in the world. And I, as a teacher myself, I give multiple opportunities in every course for students to write their own stories from their own perspectives about whatever it is they feel they need to talk about and process. I've been lucky because I teach communication, so I can turn any course I teach into, you're going to write an autoethnography on, you pick the topic. And then, you know, and then it works out. And then some of them feel very relieved to do that. And the acknowledgement that we can give them is, I think, the key. That's my personal opinion on that.
Dave, can you see the question? Are you frozen still? Oh,
Yeah, sorry, I'm back now. I wasn't
Okay.
sure when Lisa was through. So like Lisa, you know, I can add all ethnography, and I do add all ethnography into a lot of my courses. And you know, some of the narratives that are shared, they're so triggering for some of my other students that I've had to stop sharing the narratives with the class. So they still write them, and they don't share them during the process like I used to have them do. They share them at the very end of the course, and then I have 3 days of sharing your autoethnographies, and one of them is what I call a trigger day. So if they have a triggering narrative, then everybody goes on that day so that people can choose not to come to class if they don't want to hear it. As far as teachers that have made a difference in my life, unlike Lisa, I never wrote about the things that were going on in my life when I was younger. And but high school was my salvation. I loved high school. I was one of those weird kids that never missed a day of school. So my especially my male teachers, they became father figures to me, and we established very close relationships. And I shared a lot, but I didn't write a lot. So I shared a lot with them. They knew what was going on in my life. And it was interesting. I was the first kid in my school to come from a divorced family. So I think that's rather unique for the time. But anyway, so there was a lot of sympathy and for me at school, and so teachers reached out, and so I think all of them made a difference in my life. So I was just very fortunate to be in a situation where I had so many people looking out for me.
no, that's great. It looks like Marissa has a question. And then Laurel after that.
Yeah, hi. This is a wonderful panel, and I just ordered your book. I'm very excited to read it. I have a bit of an unusual question, perhaps, but I think this is the room to ask it, given what you're talking about. I am an adjunct faculty in social work in Canada, and I use storytelling a lot in my own pedagogy and practice. And often students in social work, and I'm getting the sense in other disciplines, are asked to narrate their stories of trauma as part of assessment. And students struggle with that, right? That part of becoming an ethical and thoughtful social worker, reflexivity is a critical part of that, so that we're attending to the harm that we do. So reflexivity is so important. And so we want to support our students to develop that. But at the same time, students sometimes struggle with doing that work and feeling like they are compelled to tell their trauma stories for a grade. And so navigating that tension can be quite tricky. And And so I'm bringing this to an autoethnography room of educators and writers, because I, like you, agree with the importance and power of narrating our stories, of autoethnography, of reflexivity, and also I'm fortunate to have my students be honest with me about their own discomfort at times, even though we build safety in the classroom with these exercises. So I'm wondering if this is a useful place to put that in the room. And thank you so much for entertaining it.
It's a great place to put this question in the room. I'm going to put the question in the chat, the kind of like a summary of it.
Thank you. I couldn't
have it. If I botch it, I apologize, but it's kind of like, how do you navigate the tension of asking students to be reflexive, to engage in some kind of reflexive process for a grade, which is an apt question I think many of us have dealt with. So Lisa and Dave. Yeah.
I actually just had a situation maybe last year where I had a student complain about my class because she felt like she was being re-traumatized by sharing her story. So I do think it's a difficult navigation to have students share, especially student stories of trauma and the effect that it may have on them in that sharing. So what I have done now in my instructions is, I mean, you're looking for something very specific, and I was looking for something more general in my directions, but I did kind of focus on events that may have been difficult for you to get through, kind of thing. So I've included now that you may write about, autoethnographies of joy and happiness and all those kinds of things. That way they can choose whether they want to disclose something that is very highly personal. I'm still actually, I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but I'm still surprised at the number of students who share such horrific accounts that have occurred in their lives. But at least this way they don't have to or feel like they're compelled to for a grade. So I just include that part about happiness and joy, and how autoethnographies, while they are often kind of gut-wrenching, that they don't have to be. They can be something of a very positive nature. And so that's how I handle that situation.
Yeah, I think I ran a group with men struggling with addiction at the Salvation Army, and it was a narrative group, and it was based on like telling stories, journaling for healing, things like that. Because through what I've been learning, this is a very healing practice, right? To put it all out on the page, sort through it, get it in some kind of digestible order so that you now know how to move forward from a story. And I found that, like, the first prompt was hope. I thought, let's write a story about the last time you were hopeful. Like, I'm like, this is a positive thing, right? Let's write 8 out of the 10 stories were trauma stories, because people tell the story they need to tell. So whatever the prompt is, and like Dave said, if he said it can be a joyous story, somebody will start out telling that joyous story and veer right into some trauma so whatever, I always feel like the students who need to write about it will write about it. I never required it. I would just give a prompt. So tell me about the last time you had to be resilient. And that can mean 40 different things to 40 different people. So I would never like close it up like you have to tell me about a trauma, but I would couch it some other way so that if people had to, if it was on their hearts to do this, they could do it. I took a class with Carolyn on emotions, and one guy talked about spilling paint in his garage, and we were all like, well, that's his trauma, we're just gonna have to. And as people are breaking down and crying and telling their stories, and then he gets up and he tells his story about spilled paint in a garage, everybody in the class is just like, this is very interesting, right? Like this, but so they get what they get out of it, what they put into it. I just think requiring it might be the dangerous part of it, in my mind.
I think, yeah, you're both kind of give them agency, which I think is really key in writing these kinds of stories. So Laurel, I know, has a question, and then after we'll hear from Sally.
Hi. I'm not sure if this is a question or a statement, but it is a question, kind of. I belong to a widows group, and one of the things that's so common in this widows group is the estrangement of the widow from the dead person's family. And that's different than any of the stuff you're talking about. This is like a late in life kind of experience for most of us. So an estrangement from the dead person's family and one's grandchildren from that family. So I don't know if this within your purview, or I just want to open it up that the estrangement is not always because of a baby being left behind. Sometimes it's a older person being cut off, and usually because of money, I think. Yeah.
Laura,
So I don't know if you
we have one story in the book that talks about when
good.
the last grandparent who passed, and it just severs that whole branch of the tree, and people are left like all these people that were, you know, important to us and our family. They don't exist. Well, they exist obviously, but they don't exist as part of the support system or as part of the social system or as part of the, and what an alienating, horrible experience. So no, it's not totally from the perspective of being widowed, but it is resulting from the death of one of the last, like the matriarch, and then the tree splinters, and people are just left, you know, and not connected anymore. That is it's we never thought about, and it's something that I think is so important. And thank you for sharing that.
Maybe book 2.
Book 2, yes, yes.
Yeah, there could be so many books about this. Thank you, Laurel. Sally.
Thank you, Lisa.
Sally, I think, is she here?
You're muted, Sally.
Oh, Sally, I think you're muted. Yeah.
Yeah, I was muted. Sorry, and everybody moved around.
That's okay.
That's okay. I teach counselling and psychotherapy students, and like you were saying, Lisa, you know, that even though, you know, we invite them to talk about any kind of personal experiences in order to tie theory so that we can tell that they've got the theory, quite often they will share painful stories. But I've noticed that sometimes that's the only, they kind of want you to know that that's their background, but they don't want to say it out in a group. And sometimes that's the only way, you know. But I always think that's why I kind of insist that we do mark our group's work so that we know what's going on for them, particularly when we're looking at specific topics. But I'm also thinking that at least our students, and you're saying social care students, Marissa, that you teach, at least our students, they kind of have to be in therapy at the same time. And obviously what we're saying is that if something's triggered on the course, far better it's triggered now on the course than when you're sat with a client. And I guess that would be the same for social workers as well. And I'm laughing at Handy's comment about giving them all an A+ as well. Yeah. Oh, and there's one last thing. Somebody once, I'm estranged, and somebody once said, oh, you know, life's too short. And I was thinking about, you know, the grand narrative, life's too short. And it's like, yeah, life's too short to put up with this shit. That's when life's too short.
True. Thank you, Sally. Josh.
Yes, hello. I just put a condensed version of my question in the chat. Some of my context quickly is I'm working on my PhD, my dissertation right now in Missouri in the US. And my topics, I was really surprised when I found this book, are within or at least on the periphery of estrangement. And as I repeatedly come back to the writing, I find myself at times needing to take a break, or I guess like you've edited a book, you're continuously doing research and writing on these topics. How do you find peace or strength to continuously live in this work?
For me, it's, I don't know how to put it in words. So I had to walk away from it and come back to it, but it's been helping me to have an understanding of this relationship. I've seen it on paper. I can reflect on it in a different way. I can think about it in a different way. One of the articles I published about my dad, the whole article is this idea that I went back in time and I'm my younger self, and I used resources current for that period of time to try to understand my dad's position. So everything was kind of focused on how I thought he might be thinking. So that, I think that particular publication helped me more than anything deal with this relationship and write about it even further, as in with this book. Because in that publication, I finally understood some of the things he was probably going through. Like, I mean, my parents got married very young. They were 14 and 17 years old when they married. And so they were kids trying to learn how to raise kids. So I gave my dad a lot more forgiveness through that process. And I think that was the most beneficial thing from the writing, and where I helped me find more peace with this relationship, and to be able to write about it in a more, maybe even a more fair perspective than I may have in the past. Because it's dangerous when you see yourself continuously as the victim. That's not a good position to be writing from, and the anger that involves. So the writing process has given me ways to forgive my dad. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, and I'd like to add that writing through my own narrative while editing 13 other narratives on like some just devastating stories, I would work on my stuff, take a break, and I would gear up to sit down with the other stories. Like it was a literal, I would stock my fridge. I would have to go through this ritual, because I knew I was going to dive deep, and I wasn't coming out until I went through all 13 of those again, And so, it was, I think we went through 4 or 5 cycles of editing. And it was this, here we go. And it was like, I don't know, I am not an athlete, but I can imagine it was like preparing for a marathon or something like that before doing it. I would just like get everything ready and then tell people I associate with, you're not going to hear from me for a week because I've got stuff to do. And I would just get into it. And I would feel it. Josh, I did not run from the feeling of it, because the feeling of it is exactly what we do this kind of work for. It's the evoking, the emotive stuff, the body stuff, all of it. And so I wanted to feel it, and I wanted to feel it with the people who were writing these other deeply personal stories. And so that's how I did it. And when it was done, I put it away, and I didn't look at it for I didn't even look at it for this panel. Let me just tell you that right now, because I was done. I was like, phew, okay, I gotta recover now. So
it stays with you. This is so I know we're at time, but Dave and Lisa, if you wouldn't mind sharing your contact information in the chat, like your email. There are also social rooms, as you know, where you can meet up again. But I think one of the best things about these sessions is you learn how people engage your work and the multiple perspectives that they're taking to your work. So thank you so much, Dave and Lisa, for sharing your work with us today and the process. I hope you all do get the book. Truly, it is amazing and a lot of resonance with this. So thank you again. Thank you all for being here. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your conference.